Yes, welcome to DC Economics. So in this lecture session, we are going to talk about the theories of demand and supply. So coherently, we are going to begin by understanding what is demand. So demand is the willingness or desire and the ability to buy a certain quantity of commodities at going price and a specific period of time, at a going market price and a specific period of time. So what you need to understand when you speak or you talk about demand, what you need actually to realize is that a consumer, when make a purchase on a certain goods and services, he or she is reinforced due to its ability. He or she has ability to buy a certain good, but also the willingness to do so, as well as the specific period of time or she devote himself to spend on a certain good and services. So actually, the demand is covered with these four conditions that include willingness to buy, ability to buy, and specific period of time. So if these actual conditions are not achieved, are not fulfilled, demand cannot be achieved in a sustainable way. So actually, the issue of demand is something that is performed by almost every people in the world, in exceptions of only animals who cannot themselves go to the market and purchase a certain good and services. But everything that survives is around in the world involved in demand. Even cows actually feed with maize. Even human being actually feed with food. Everything is actually involved in demand. So the interaction of the economy, the interaction of people, the interaction of technology, the interaction of everything in the world is actually linked or get involved with demand. So let's discuss about the demand schedule. A demand schedule, this is a list of various quantities of commodities bought at various level of price at a specific period of time. The list of various quantities actually demonstrated or show out throughout the demand schedule. So suppose we have this demand schedule over here. We are at the left hand side, we have the price in Tanzania shillings, and at the right we have the quantity in kilograms. So as you can observe here, when the price is 100, the quantity is 10. So we have the price that is 100 up to 10. We have starting from 10 to 100. When we arrange it in the ascending order, we get a clear picture on the effect of demand. So as the price increases, the quantity demanded falls, and when the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. So under the principles of the law of demand, we observe that as the way the price increases, the quantity must fall, and the way the price decreases, quantity demanded increases. Let's discuss a little about the demand curve. Demand curve, this is a curve which represents the demand schedule. So if you want to present the demand schedule, you actually use a demand curve. So graphical now, the quantity demanded is plotted on the horizontal axis, and the respective price are plotted on the vertical axis. For example, the demand schedule above now, we may observe the demand schedule here, over here. We have the demand curve. Let's observe the demand curve over here. We have the price at the right hand side, and we have the quantity that is in the x-axis. So when you try to sketch out the graph, the demand curve, this curve actual normal appears in the showing the inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. So if you try to sketch, you have the price that is starting from 10 up to 100, but also you have the quantity at the x-axis that is starting from the point of 0 to 100. So when you sketch out this graph, you start to link the points from the x-axis to y-axis. We have the point that is 10 and the price that links with price that is 100. We have 20 that is linked with 90. We have 30 that is connected to 80. So this kind of graph, as you can observe, it shows that as the price increases to 100, we observe the quantity demanded decreases. As the price decreases from 190 to 80 to 70, we observe the quantity demanded to increase to 10, 20, 30 up to 100. So when you try to sketch up the graph will appear like this from left to right. It will slope downward from left to right. And actually to show there is an inverse relationship between it shows the inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. And that's the principle of demand, that when the price increases, the quantity demanded falls. And when the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. So as you can observe the graph, when we link these points, when you try to cross-check out these points, you'll observe that at the way price increases, quantity demanded will be falling. So we join like that. So when you try to join like that, our graph will appear in that manner. So it will be also very important to discuss about the features of demand curve, so as we can still capture the concept and notice well the concept about demand curve. The demand curve, the first feature, the demand curve slope downward from left to right. As I told you earlier, that implies that the higher prices, the lower quantities will be bought, and at a lower price, more quantities will be bought. Not only that, second, another feature of the demand curve is that it has a negative slope due to the inverse relationship. So it has a negative slope due to the inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. This means that the price goes to its own direction and the quantity flows in its own direction, in different directions. So if there is a price and quantity flows in different directions, this implies that there is an inverse relationship between the two variables, that is price and quantity demanded. Why a demand curve has a negative slope? That's the question we may ask ourselves. Why the demand curve has a negative slope? The demand curve slopes downward from left to right due to the following factors. The first factor is the law of diminishing marginal utility. According to this law, as someone consumes more and more units of commodity, the marginal utility derived from each successive unit added tend to decline. So therefore, as the consumer purchases more units of commodity, marginal utility from each additional unit bought tend to decline. Also, the price of commodity increases, the marginal utility of a commodity tends to decline, hence the decline in demand. This actual, as the way consumer increases, make addition more consumption of commodities, less utility will be derived by that particular consumer. If you still thirst and you take one bottle or two bottles of soda, and those bottles actually satisfy your thirst, if you add more additional units of soda, if you add more bottles of soda, this means that those extra that you have had will be extra to you, and actually they will not actually add anything to you. You will not add any extra utility from you, but also it may be a problem to bring you a discomfort or a disaster. Maybe you need to have a here and here flow from the toilet and so forth. This means that the thirst was covered by those the first bottle and second bottle that you take it earlier. So this means that as the consumer increases more additional units of commodity, less utility or shield derived from that particular commodity. The same applies. You feel hunger, then you take out one plate of food, one plate of rice, and you actually feel yourself now you are satisfied. If you make out more additional plates of rice, this means that nothing you are going to gain but a disaster to your stomach. And another factor that's show up the reason why demand curve has a negative slope with the income effect. As the price of commodity falls, leading income of the consumer increases, and consumers now can buy more units of commodity with the same increase, with the same amount of money income. But also the substitution effect as well. As the price of commodity falls, assume that the price of substitute remains constant. Consumers buy more and more of it and less of substitute, and vice versa. So the issue of substitution effect, if there's an option for someone to make a substitution, maybe from meat to fish, this means that those fluctuations for an option will actually create out a falling of demand of a certain good and rising demand of another good. This means that now we'll come up to realize the concept on the point of why demand curve as a negative slope, but also the price effect as well. This is a combination of income and substitution effect. When the price of commodity falls, consumers buy more of it because of the income and substitution effect, and vice versa. The issue of price effect. If the consumers can find that the price of a certain good is high, we expect that in one way or another the consumers may not afford if his or her income is low. So this means that will make or force a consumer to look an alternative to where he or she can afford to purchase a certain good and services. And actually that may be the reasons why the demand curve has a negative slope. Those fluctuations of actual what is consumed and the price level and the affordability of a consumer. But also the change in the number of consumers could be the effect. When the price of commodity decreases, the number of consumers increases because even poor people start buying the commodities. And that's why when the price increases, the number of consumers decreases, as now the decline in demand. But also, let's talk about the individual demand schedule. So, individual demand schedule, this is a schedule which shows the values, quantities of commodities, both at values, ranges, or level of price at the specific period of time by a single person in the market. Let's talk, for example, Mr. Dionys bought values, quantities of sugar at a different level of price as follows. Let's assume since now the demand curve shows the values quantities, quantities of commodity bought at various ranges or level of prices. Let's assume Mr. Dionys have brought these quantities over here. We have the price of shillings, that is 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, and 10. And we have the quantity at the right hand side in kilograms, that is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. So when I present out what actual Mr. Dionys have brought, and the price level of those quantities, that is what we refer to as the individual demand schedule. Now let's look now the individual demand curve from what is known as individual demand schedule. So the individual demand curve, this is a curve which represents a graphical demand schedule of a single person in the market. For example, from the above example, as we have seen earlier, that the demand schedule for Mr. Dionys that brought values of quantities at a given price level may be presented graphical like this. So we sketch out the graph like this, and at the left represent the price of those quantities that was bought by Mr. Dionys, together with at x-axis we sketch out the different quantities that was bought by Mr. Dionys, that is at x-axis at the quantity level. So as you can observe, what is actually bought at the level of price of 60? This means that what Mr. Dionys bought was very high, that is the quantities. What is actually bought at the level price of 60 was low, since now what was bought was 10. And what was bought at the level price of 50 was actually many, since there were 20 quantities of sugar that was brought. And what was brought at 40 was high because of the more decrease of price level from 50 to 40. The same applies the decrease of price of 30 to 20. So that is how it is. Let's discuss about the market demand schedule. The market demand schedule, this is a combination of two or more demand schedules of two or more persons in the market. So when you combine two or more demand schedules, as I told you, the demand schedule is a schedule which shows the values, quantities of commodities bought at values, range, or level of prices. So in order to get a demand schedule, we normally sum out the demand of two or more persons in the market. And for that case now, in this now, for instance, if the following demand schedules are of two individuals in the market, that is Mr. A and Mr. D, this means that when we combine out Mr. A and Mr. B demand curve is what when we combine out Mr. A and Mr. B demand schedules, this means that we obtain what is known as a market demand schedule. So in a simple term, a market demand schedule is a combination of the two demand schedules of different individuals in the market. So when you try to illustrate this, let's now consider this graph over here. for more understanding. Let's assume we have the first demand schedule for Mr. A and we have the second demand schedule for Mr. B. So since we have the price, the first demand schedule combines the price at the left, that is in Tanzania shillings, and the quantity in the kilogram. So the price that is 1.75 and 1 and 1 3, and we have the second demand schedule that represented by the price in Tanzania shillings, that is 1.75 and 1. At the right we have 2 and 8. So when you combine the two demand schedule, the first demand schedule and the second demand schedule, this means that we have 1 plus 2 that will give you 3. And when we take out 3 plus 8 will give you 11. So when you sketch out the total demand schedule, the market demand schedule will be having 1.75 at the right, that is 1, and the quantity, that is 3 and 11. So those are actual, that is how we present out, we sketch out the demand schedule. So after understanding the market demand schedule, that is a combination of the two demand schedule of different in videos. Now let's discuss now the market demand curve. Since we have understand what is a market demand schedule, now the market demand curve now is a sketch of those demand schedule, is a sketch of the market demand schedule. So market demand curve, actual, this is a horizontal summation of the demand curve of two or more individuals demand schedules in the market. So when you try to look on the market demand curve, as I told you, is actually drawn from those two demand is actually drawn from what is known as a market demand schedule. That is a combination of the different two individual demand schedules. So the horizontal summation of the demand curve of the two or more individual demand schedules in the market are shown like this. We have the first demand curve that is having 1.78, and we have 1.75, and we have 1, as you can observe. So we have the Mr. A and Mr. B demand curve. So when you try to sketch out this demand curve, we'll be having the price level, that is 1.75 and 1, but also the quantities level, that is 2 to 8. So when you try to sum out, when you try to sum up 8 plus 3, that is 11. And when you try to sum up 1 plus 2, that will give you 3. You obtain the total demand curve, that is 3 and 11. But we seems to have the price level that is constant, that is 1.75, as you can observe to our graph. So that is how we present the market demand curve. That is how we present out the market demand curve. The law of demand. The law of demand states that other things remain equal. The amount of product that the consumers are willing and able to buy during the same period of the time changes inversely with the price of those goods or products. It means that a lower price, more quantity of commodities are bought, and at a higher price, small quantities of commodities are bought. So the law of demand actually tends to explain on how behavior of consumers in the market when they purchase goods and services whenever the price increases or decreases. So when the price increases, quantity demand falls, and when the price decreases, quantity demand increases. So there are assumptions of law of demand. So the law applies only when the several factors remain constant. These factors are called the assumptions of law of demand. The assumptions are as follows. The income of consumers remain constant, but also there should be no change in the income of the consumers when the price of any commodity changes, because only in this case now the law of demand will apply. And if the income of consumers actually changes, this means that there is a possibility of a consumer to increase more quantities of goods whenever or without even affected with the level of prices. For example, due to the rise in the price level, the income also increases at the same time. Now consumers will not decrease the demand for the commodities. So the law of demand will not apply, and vice versa is true. But taste and preference, there should be no change in taste and preference by the individuals, because when taste of any consumers changes, now demand will not increase, now despite the fall in the price level. But also the further expected change in price. If further change of price, if there is a further change is expected in the price level of any commodity, now the law of demand will not apply. For example, if the price of any commodities is expected to fall in the future, consumers may not purchase greater quantity of commodities because they will wait for the further fall in the price level. So this is actually a normal case to normal life on agricultural markets, as the way the behavior of the producer in agricultural products behaves. Take a charge, play with price level in the market to maximize profit. But also the price of substitute of commodities. There should be no change in the price of substitute of commodities. This means that there should not be an option for a consumer to shift maybe from meat to a fish, or to coffee to tea. If the price of any substitute commodities changes, the law of demand will not apply. For example, when the price of tea rises and at the same time now the price of coffee also rises, this means that there will be an effect on the consumer's purchases on goods and services in that particular good in the market. But also the effect of weather condition. If the weather condition is not favorable for consumption of a certain commodity, its demand will not increase, even if not increase, even if the price falls as well. Discuss about the exceptions of the law of demand. So the exceptions of law of demand, this is a situation whereby more units of commodities are bought at higher price than at a lower price, and vice versa actually is true. There are different causes of the exceptions of law of demand include gifted goods or inferior goods. These are goods which are guarded by the people of low standard. So the demand for this good decreases when income of people increases. So when the price of inferior goods is very low, low income earners would buy less unit of inferior goods and buy more of the other goods. But when the price of the inferior goods rises, low income earners would buy less unit of other goods or normal goods and buy more unit of the inferior goods. For example, if sembe is regarded as inferior food for Mr. Tembe, while rice is regarded as a normal or superior food. Now that when the price of the sembe decreases, Mr. Tembe will not buy more sembe. Instead, he will buy more rice due to the income effect. Whenever when the price of the sembe increases, now his real income will be low, and hence now he will buy more unit of sembe than rice. Not only that, but also the effect of actually the different goods or inferior goods actually ignore or violate out the law of demand. Since under inferior goods, these are good regarded by the people of the low standard. This means that when the income in one way changes, we actually see to observe the issue of consuming of commodities changes different from what is expected from the law of demand. But also the goods of extensions or luxury goods. These are the commodities which are luxurious and expensive in nature. So we expect that there are some people who demand them only even if they are at a higher price because of prestige. In such case, even if the price of such commodities increases, some people demand more of these commodities. For example, a person can decide to buy an expensive car like Mitsubishi Benz or Tesla in one way or another from this company which earn $70 million shillings, which other cannot afford. But also the issue of a fear of serious shortage is also the factor, the exceptions of law of demand. Actually, there are some people who fears for a certain commodity that maybe it will actually be increases price at the coming time, or it will be having a shortage in particular market. So some other people may feel that it is very pressure to increase, to demand more at this time when they are at a low price. And at this time, even if they are at a higher price, by knowing that they will make a profit or maximize output on the coming year or months or few years to come. But also the ignorance of a consumer may be the factor. There are some people who actually purchases the goods and services at a higher price because they are not aware of the price level of commodities. If someone goes to the shop and asking for a certain commodity without even any information from another shop, he or she will come across and purchase on a particular goods at higher prices, and this may actually lead to decrease the consumer surplus, and actually may lead to producer surplus at a particular producer in that particular market. But also the expectation of the future change in price. If consumers expect that the price of a certain commodity will increase in the future, they will buy more unit of commodities even if the price is higher. But if they expect that the price will further fall, they will buy less. So a good example is during wars when the price of fuel rises so often. Now people tend to buy more oil in large amounts with the expectation that the price will continue to rise as the war goes on. Or during harvest season, people expect that the price of crops will fall, and hence now they buy less even if the price is low. Let's discuss about the exception demand schedule. This is the list of values, quantities of commodity that is bought at a values level of price, normally at a higher price of a commodities, and more is demanded at the lower price. So this is the list of values, quantities of commodity that is bought at the value levels of price, and normally at a higher price of a commodities, more is demanded than at a lower prices. So if now more is actually demanded at a higher price than at a lower price, this means the exception demand schedule will appear like this. Instead, in the demand schedule, in the normal demand, and in a normal demand schedule, we expect that there was an inverse relationship, so the graph will slope from left to downward. Now, from the exception demand curve, we expect, since now the law violates, the situation violates the law of demand, we expect the graph to go upward positively. So this means that it shows that the price level in the left hand side, we have 109, 87, 60, 50, 40, 30, and 20 up to 10. And at the quantity at kilogram in the right hand side, we have 190, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, and 10. So as you can observe here, it shows that as the price level increases, we observe to see the quantity demanded also increases. So as the price level increases, we expect also there will be an increase in the quantity demanded due to that violation of the law of demand. So we expect also, if there will be a decrease in the quantity demanded, we expect that the far falls will be also in the price level. So after understanding the demand schedule, let's now look on how we can draw the exception demand curve from what is known as exception demand schedule. So this is a graphical representation. Exception demand curve is a graphical representation of exception demand schedule, and it slopes downward from right to left. So when you try to sketch out the graph for exception demand curve, we expect the graph would appear like this. So we have the price level on the left hand side, and we have the quantity at the right hand side. So we normally sketch out the price level together with the quantity. And remember, the nature for an exception demand curve is normally positively related, since because when the price increases, the quantity demanded tend to increase, as it violates the law of demand that states that the price we expect when the price increases, quantity demand fall. But now it is quite different from what is known as the exception demand curve. So if we have the price level starting from the 0, 10, 20 up to 100 price, that is Tanzania shillings, and we have the quantity at the x-axis in kilogram starting from 0, 10 up to 100. So when you sketch out the points, that is 10, 100, we sketch 10 from the quantity to price of 100, and we sketch out 10 to a price level that is 10, and we sketch out 20 to the point of 20. We sketch out 30, that's from the kilogram quantity to price level that is 30, 40 to 40, 50 to 50. So you observe the graph will be going upward. So 60 will go with 60, 70 with 70. So your graph will be positively related. So the demand curve will be slopely from left to right, and it will actually show that it goes it is in the shape of positively related. This means that price and quantity, both of them move in the same direction. Let's discuss a little about the features of the exception demand curve. A demand curve has the following features. First, it slopes upward from right to left, as I told you earlier, implying that at higher prices of commodities, large quantity of commodities bought than at a lower price. And second, it has a positive slope. This means that the slope is positive because of the positive relationship between the price and quantity demanded, as you can observe. Change in quantity demanded and change in demand. So as we discuss here, what is about difference between the change in quantity demanded and change in demand? Since that some people confuse these two concepts, the change in quantity demanded refers to an increase or decrease in quantity demanded by consumers due to change in price of commodities. Usually, when the price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa is true. Assuming other factors remain constant, factors that remain constant include the consumer taste and preference, not only the consumer taste and preference, but also fashions, populations, income, price of substitute, and so forth. So in one way or another, there are some factors that remain constant, as you can observe. So those factors actually include the price of substitute, good weather condition, and so forth. So when you try to sketch out the graph showing the change in quantity demanded, that is referred to an increase or decrease in quantity demanded by consumers due to change in price of commodities. And usually when the price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa is true, as you can observe. So when you sketch out the graph with the change in quantity demanded, to show that at the price level, when the price increases, at the left hand side we have 0, we have, and at the x-axis we have the quantity, that is Q3 and Q2, and that we have, let's give them Q3 and Q2, as you can observe, and that here at the price we have P1 and P2. So we have also E, that the E represent out the equilibrium level, and the E that does not have an obstacle on the upper side represent out the normal equilibrium level. So as you can observe, when the price increases from P1 to P2, we expect the quantity demanded to decrease from Q2 to Q3. So this means that any changes in the price level bring the changes in quantity demanded. So when there is a change of price P1 to move to P2, we expect the quantity demanded to shift from Q2 to Q3. So the equilibrium level from point E shifted towards the equilibrium point E. So in the equilibrium point, the equilibrium point shifts to the new equilibrium level of point E upstock. So something to note is that any change in quantity demanded, a change in quantity demanded involves the movement along the same demand curve, as you can observe. So this is a graph how it looks like. So the change in quantity demanded is actually having a big difference from what is known as a change in demand. Now, after understanding the change in quantity demanded refer to the increase or decrease in quantity demanded by consumers due to change in price of commodities. And usually when the price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa is true. Let's discuss now about the change in demand. Is an increase or decrease in demand due to change in other factors other than the price of the commodities. So factors which cause change in demand are such as income, price of substitutes, taste and fashions, population, and etc. For example, if the income of consumer increases, then the demand for a normal good also increases. So this means that when income of an individual increases, this means that people now are there to purchase the normal goods. So this is quite different from what is known as a change in quantity demanded. So a change in demand is the increase or decrease in demand due to change in any other factor. It's not must be only price. No, it is not must also be income. No, any factor that may cause a change in demand, increase or decrease of it, rather than the price of commodities. So let's try illustrative diagram. Let's try to look this illustrative diagram how we draw what is known as the change in demand. As you can observe here, we have the price level at the left hand side, that is the price level in Tanzania shillings, and at the x-axis we have the quantity in kilogram, as you can observe. So when you try to sketch it, you can observe the P1, that is the price, remained constant. this means that the price level is drawn at the point where it is constant, but it shows out there is a shift or movement of the demand curve from Q1 to Q2, from Q1 to Q8, from Q1 to Q6. So the demand curve shift from D1 to D2. This means what? Suppose the price is at 0 P1 and quantity demand is at 0 Q1. So when the income increases, quantity demanded shifted from Q6 from Q4 from Q1. So from this particular diagram, it shows that when there is a shift or increase in price level, when there is any factor that causes any change of the quantity demanded, the demand curve may shift from D1 to D2. As well, also the output level may be affected for the shift movement from Q1 to Q6. So this is the quantity in kilogram, as you can observe, in the x-axis and the price level at the vertical axis. So after an increase in income, demand must also increase from Q1 to Q6. So there is a change in equilibrium position from point E to the new point of equilibrium, that is E. And a shift in demand curve from D1 to D2 to new demand curve, as you can observe, that is D2, D2. So a change in demand normally involves a shift of a new demand curve. So any change in demand involves a shift for a new demand curve. As you can observe, the demand curve shifts from D1 to D2. And the equilibrium level shifted from the point of equilibrium to the new equilibrium level, that is E apostrophe, as you can observe. In demand. Factors for change in demand. There are several factors that lead to the change in demand. The change in demand, this means that increase or decrease of demand. The first is a change of income. Due to an increase of the income of the consumers, demand rises when the income decreases and the demand declines. But also the change in taste and fashion. Due to the change in taste and fashion, demand may increase or decrease. For example, if a commodity, let's say a car, is a new fashion, its demand will increase. But if it is out of the fashion, its demand will decline. The change in the price of the substitute is also the factor. If a commodity has a close substitute, its demand may be affected by the change in price of its substitute. For example, if the price of coffee increases, it will lead to an increase in demand for the tea. And if the price of coffee decreases, the demand for tea will decline, while that of coffee will increase. So when you try to sketch out the graph with the change in price of substitute, this means that somebody can have an option to either to make a shift from coffee to tea due to different reasons, maybe a price or a quality of a product. So any change of this substitute, any affections that is brought by the substitute of commodities, is a factor that leads to the change of demand. A demand may change either by increasing or decreasing. Not only that, now the graph, when it shows like this, we have the first graph represent out coffee and the second graph represent out tea. So when you observe that when the price of tea increases, for example, if the price of coffee increases, that's represented by coffee. As I told you, the left graph is coffee and the right hand side is a tea graph. So when the price of if a commodity has a cross substitute, now here if the price of coffee increases, now it will lead to an increase in demand for tea. This means that when the price of coffee increases, people will shift consuming coffee and shift to tea because the price of tea is constant. So if the price increases from P1 to P3, that is of coffee, we expect the quantity to shift to decrease from Q4 to Q1. So this means that if the quantity of coffee will decrease, this means that people now will shift to the right hand graph, will shift to the right hand side graph, that is of tea. This means that people will increase consumptions of tea from Q4 to Q6 at a given, because the price of a tea is constant at P1, as you can observe. So many of the consumers will shift to increase for demand for tea because of the price of tea is constant at P1. So the quantity of tea will increase from Q4 to Q6. Another factor for the change of demand include advertisement. Advertisement creates awareness about a certain commodity to consume and lead to an increase in demand. But when a firm product is not advertised, its demand may decrease. For example, Coca-Cola company uses a lot of resources to advertise products. That is why the demand for its product is high as compared to the product of other companies. But also, the change in population may be the factor for the change of demand, maybe increase or decrease of demand. When the population increases, demand for goods and services rises. But when the population size declines, demand for most of the goods decline. Sometimes now a decrease in population can lead to a closure of business in a certain firm because of the decrease in demand for its commodities. For example, the demand for most of the commodities in Dar es Salaam or in other major cities like Nairobi, Kenya, and Kampala, and etc., like is higher because than in small towns like Chalinze, Mtwara, Lindi, etc., due to high population size of those particular areas. But also change in wealth and distribution is going to be the factor. When wealth is more equal distributed, the demand for goods and services will rise, while when wealth is evenly distributed, the demand falls. So goods which are affected by the nature of the distribution of wealth are the necessities of life, like food, stuffs, clothes, which are consumed by the majority of the people. So when income is evenly distributed, so the underprivileged groups in the societies fail to afford, even if the necessities of life answer fall in the demand of these goods. So if the wealth is equally distributed, the demand for goods and services will rise. While when the wealth is unevenly distributed, the demand falls. This means that if there is a corruption, the national cake is not divided equal in the particular country. This means that there will be a very big gap of those who haven't and those who have it. So this means that even the circulation of income for what actually who benefit from the economy would be low. So if few people benefits means that few people consumes, but if many people benefits means that many people consumes, being able to meet spending of particular commodities and services. But also the economic condition. When there is economic prosperity in the country, demand will be greater. While during the parable for the use of a certain commodity, its demand would increase. And if the weather is unfavorable, the demand would decline. For example, during hot weather conditions, the demand for cold drinks rises, but during the cold weather conditions, the demand for the same commodities falls. But also, when at the hot conditions, the demand for sweaters pullover decreases, but at the cold condition, it increases. Let's discuss about the demand functions. This is the mathematical relationship between the demand and the factors that determine demand. We have the QD, which is a function of P that present out the populations. The PS represents the price of substitute. WS represent weather. TP represent taste and preference. A represent advertisement. And Y represent income. P is the price. And the E, less of C, is economic condition. So a demand function showing the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded can be expressed as follows. As you can observe, the quantity demanded is the function of P, that is the population, the PS. As you can observe, that is the price of substitute. WS, that is weather condition. And A is what the advertisement. Y is the income. And PO is what we call it the price. The E is economic conditions, as you can observe. So demand function is a mathematical relationship between demand and the factors that determine demand. So when you try to discuss, to give illustrative analytics on demand function, you must speak about the relationship that is shown mathematically. Between what? It's between two factors, between demand and the factors that determine demand. What are the factors that determine demand? We have learned previous that include price. We include price of substitute, weather condition, advertisement, income, the price level, the economic condition of a particular country, and so forth. You may add other minor factors like political stability also can determine demand, the stability of that particular country as well. So, and what is known as demand function is given by presented by the function that is QD, which is equal to FP, as you can observe. So when you present out QD, that is FP, F represent out the functions, and actually the P is what we call the price level. So it will be better now we actually give a more analytics on a demand function. As I told you, a demand function showing the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded can be expressed in the general QD, given a function that is QD, that is FP. F is the function, as I told you, and P is the price level. So for mathematical formula of equation that is given by y, which is equal to mx plus c, we may demonstrate the demand function in the given order of the function. So when we express the demand function in the order of mathematical formula for equation that is y, which is equal to mx plus c, where actually m represents the slope, and c represents the constant, whereby y represents the function of x. So when you demonstrate the mathematical formula of equation, it will be equals to mx plus c. M with the slope and c is the constant. So when you express the quantity demand function, it will be equals to negative mp plus c. So m is the slope of demand function and p is the price. So let's discuss about the slope of a demand function. So the slope of demand function is always negative because of the inverse relationship between the quantity demanded and the price, between the quantity demanded and the price. So for example, we have the quantity demanded that is negative 2p, and the m that is negative 2, that is slope, and the price is equal to 1. So when we plug into the demand function, the quantity demanded function will be having negative 2p plus 20. That is QD, which is equal to 20 minus 2p. So if the price ranges from 0 to 10, now the demand schedule will appear in the following table. So from the table below, if the price of 0 to 10, then the demand schedule will appear as follows. We have the quantity demanded at the left hand side, and you have the price. So under the quantity demand equation, that is 20 minus 2p, when we try to find the quantity demanded, it means that we'll plug in the values of price level to the quantity demanded equation. So we have the 20, 18, 60, 14, 12, 10, 8, 60, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this what is known as demand schedule that can be shown on the given equation, but also the demand curve. So when you try to sketch out the demand curve can be shown below as follows. We have the price level at the left hand side, the vertical axis of the line, that is y-axis, and we have the quantity in kilograms, and we have also the price, the price in Tanzania shillings and the price in Tanzania shillings. So the demand curve is presented by having the price and the quantity demanded. The quantity demanded is given as qx in the x-axis. So when you try to sketch out the graph, your graph will appear in this form. We have 0, 20, and we have also the values of the price level corresponding to the quantity demanded. So when you sketch out the graph, following or linking the point, your graph will appear like this. That's the demand curve. So it shows the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. As the price increases, quantity demanded tend to fall. So there is an inverse relationship between the two variables. So let's try to perform this question here. Which of the following is a demand function and why? Which of the following is a demand function and why? Suppose we have the quantity that is 3p plus 4, but also we have the quantity that is negative p plus 4. So we want to take out, we want to look on which of the following demand function is actually presented as a demand function. So we take out the first equation from Q, that is 3p plus 4. We find the slope. The slope there for the demand function is 3, and it is positive. This means that there is a positive relationship between the quantity and demand. But we have the second equation that is negative p plus 4. The slope is negative 3. So this means that the first equation presents out the positive relationship, and the second one presents out the negative relationship. Interrelated demand. Sometimes demand for one commodity is affected by the demand for another commodities. For instance, now the demand for coffee is related to the demand of another, is related to another demand. Demand for commodities will lead to an increase in demand for another commodities. For example, an increase in demand of motor cars will lead to an increase in demand for petrol. So there are different types of interrelated demand, including joint complementary demand. This is the demand for two or more commodities which are jointly needed to satisfy particular ones. So example of joint demand are tea and sugar, car and petrol, radio, battery, and etc. And so in this case, an increase in demand for one commodities will lead to an increase in demand for another commodities. So the commodities which are demanded close together, this graph is shown like this. We have the first graph that presents out motor car, and you have the second graph that presents out petrol. So as you can observe here, because motor car and petrol are complementary demand, a joint demand that when you consume one good, you need to consume another good. This graph shows that the increase in quantity demanded for the motor cars will lead to an increase in the same demand for petrol. So the demand curve increases for both motor cars and the petrol, and their price level seems to be plus 1 and plus 2 is a constant level. So demand curve shifted from D1 to D2, represent out any increase, any purchase. When you purchase a motor car, when you consume motor car, you need to consume also petrol. So this is the demand for car, as I told you in the left hand side graph, and the right hand side graph, the demand for petrol, as you can observe. So another example of joint demand by using illustration a table graph showing the relationship between price and sugar and tea leaves. Another example that shows the joint or complementary demand is the graph showing the relationship between the price of sugar and tea and the tea leaves. This means that you cannot consume and the use of a tea without sugar. This means that any consumption of sugar will increase also consumption of tea leaves. So since we have the price of sugar that costs 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30 at the left hand side, that is in Tanzania shillings. But also we have the quantity demanded for tea leaves in a kilogram, that is 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. It shows that any increased price of sugar will also affect the increase in quantity demanded of tea leaves. But also it shows that any affections of price, any changes of price that affect the quantity of tea leaves may actually lead to the progressing of this kind of a graph of tea leaves and the progressing graph, the quantity of what is produced, what is consumed for tea leaves. So it shows that the quantity demanded for tea leaves decreases when the price of sugar increases. The above graph shows that the quantity demanded for tea leaves decreases when the price of sugar increases. So in the other case, an increase in demand for tea will lead to a decrease in demand for coffee. So this relationship is shown in the graph below. We have the tea that increase in the left hand side graph, and we have the coffee that decrease, that show the decreasing of coffee in the right hand side. So if the two commodities have the competitive demand, so changes in the price of one of the two commodities due to the change in demand of another commodities. But in this case now, it shows the competitive demand. This is the demand whereby two or more commodities are substitutes, and they have the same use, for example, tea and coffee, as you can observe. So from this kind of composite demand curve, the curve show that whereby it shows that the demand whereby two or more commodities are substitute, they have the same use. Tea and coffee are substitute to each other. So in case increase in demand of tea will lead to a decrease in demand for another. So from this curve above, it shows that the demand whereby two or more commodities are substitute and have the same use. For example, tea and coffee are substitute to each other. So in this case now, an increase in demand of tea will lead to a decrease in demand of coffee. So as you can observe. So if two commodities have the competitive demand, changes in the price of one of the two commodities lead to changes in demand for another commodities. For example, if the price of tea increases, it leads to a decrease in demand for tea and leads to an increase in demand for coffee. So suppose we have the price of coffee at the left-hand side graph, that is 5 up to 35 and 15 up to 45. Its graph will appear like this. We have the price of coffee on the left-hand side and we have the quantity of tea. So any increase in price of coffee actually lead to the decrease in quantity of tea. So its graph, it will be positively related like that. So any price of coffee when increases, it lead also to an increase in quantity of tea. Another types of interrelated demand is what we call the derived demand. So the derived demand is a demand resulting from the demand for another commodity. That is, when a certain commodity is not needed for its own sake, but as the result of demand for another commodities. For example, the demand for factors of production is the result of demand for final goods. For example, the demand for cotton is derived from the demand for clothes. So in this case now, an increase in the demand for the clothes will lead to an increase in demand for the cotton. Also, an increase in demand for education will lead to an increase in demand for exercise books, teachers, and pens as well. So this relationship is actually shown in this graph over here. In the left graph, we have the increase in clothes, that's increase in demand of clothes, and the right hand side, we have the increase in demand of cotton. So if an increase of one demand influences an increase of another demand, this means that when clothes increases, demand from D0 to D1 influences the same increase in demand of cotton. That is because cotton and clothes are something that are related and are used coherently. So your graph would show that there will be an increase in demand of D2 to D1 for the cotton. So this means that at a given level of prices, any change or an increase in demand of a cloth of a particular good influencing the increase of demand of another good. So your graph will appear like this. So the left graph represents out the increase in clothes, and increase in the right hand side graph represents the increase in demand for cotton. So any movement changes of price affect out this kind of the demand in one way or another. Let's discuss about another that is composite demand, is another type of interrelated demand. Some goods are used for different purpose. So under composite demand, we look on the goods that are used for different purpose. The total demand for all uses is known as a composite demand. For example, the demand steel is a composite demand because a steel is needed for many uses such as building ships, manufacturing of cars, production of different kinds of machines. So in this case, an increase in demand for any commodities, for example, an increase in demand for motor cars will lead to an increase in demand for steel for production for motor cars and reduces the amount of available for other uses. Elasticity of demand.